Hi, everybody. David Capes here with the Stone Chapel Podcast. Welcome back. Terry Wildman has been with us before. He's returning today. You may remember he is the Indigenous church leader from Phoenix who is chiefly responsible for the First Nations version and Indigenous translation of the New Testament. Now, more about that in a minute. But first, let's hear from Ed Stetzer of Biola University. He is the Grand Poobah of the Church Leaders Podcast Network. Ed?
You know, it's a changing world, and one of the things that help us understand the changing world is research. And so as churches have been struggling and families may be disconnected and sometimes drifting away from the church, we're kind of dealing with some of the questions of where do we go from here? And the Communio nationwide survey on faith and relationships really kind of points to the family decline and how it relates to faith decline in the United States. Actually, the survey has 3 key issues that are impacting our society today. Go to communio.org/study to download the nationwide study on faith and relationships.
Thanks, Ed. Now, the Stone Chapel Podcast is part of the Church Leaders Podcast Network. We are dedicated to providing resources for church leaders in order to help them face ministry and all its complexities today. The Church Leaders Podcast Network is going to support pastors and ministry leaders by providing some really good content, providing some insights, and also offering some practical steps on what they can do to help navigate the variety of things that are going on right now in our culture. You can learn more about that at churchleaders.com/podcast network. Now that they've translated the New Testament, the First Nations Version Translation Council is turning their attention to translating the books of Psalms and Proverbs. That translation has really very many good moments, lots of interesting features that make it a very fresh reading of the Bible. We're going to talk about that today with musician and church leader Terry Wildman on the Stone Chapel Podcast.
Bujuniji b'morazig, gitchi animiki menomashkiki manadu, indigo, Terry Wildman indishinakaz. So that was Ojibwe. Hello, my friends who share this life together with me. I said that my native name is Gitchi Animiki Menomashkiki Manadu, which means voice of great thunder with a good medicine spirit, but I'm also known as Terry Wildman.
Terry Wildman, great to see you back here on the Stone Chapel Podcast. Thanks for being with us.
It's great to be back here, especially face-to-face.
I know. Last time we were on Zoom, but this time we get to be together in the same place. You've come down to do a talk for SMU Perkins in Houston, but we're glad that you and Darlene have been able to come and stay with us a couple of days.
It's great. It's really beautiful here, and we got a wonderful tour, and it really surprised us in a good way.
We want you to come back. That's the thing. And we want you to bring others. Now, in our first podcast together a while back, we talked about the New Testament that you had published in the First Nations version. Its subtitle is An Indigenous Translation of the New Testament. And it's a fascinating read. It's a wonderful project. We're not going to repeat all of that because I want to talk about the newest project that you're involved in, which is to publish Psalms and Proverbs next. It's a huge chunk of the Old Testament. And eventually the goal is to do, I guess, the whole Old Testament, right?
Well, we'll see about that. We're praying about it.
Okay.
That's a challenge, but we'll just keep working on it and see if we get there.
Yeah, well, I hope you can, because it would be a great gift to the church and to the academy, I think, in many ways, to have this work available for us. All right, so Psalms and Proverbs. So out of all the Old Testament, why Psalms and Proverbs first?
Well, we started with Psalms and Proverbs. That's a really good question because we really wondered, what should we do next? InterVarsity Press was very interested in us doing some more. We prayed about it. We talked about it as a translation council members from different tribes. And it came down to, I think I suggested Psalms and Proverbs because so many people use Psalms and Proverbs in their daily devotions and things like that. Right. Read it every day. I've got a native pastor friend who reads it proverb every day and several Psalms every day. Mm-hmm. We just thought it'd be a good place. Many of our native people, we have songs that are traditional spiritual songs. We have wisdom sayings and wisdom keepers So we thought this could be a really good connection to take this ancient wisdom of the Jewish people and then bring it into a native context to see the places where it overlaps and places maybe where it has a different perspective. And I think that's working really well.
Part of my devotions for years was to read 5 Psalms a day and then 1 proverb. And when you do that, you do it month by month. You can read through the entire Psalter in 1 month, and then you read through the entire book of Proverbs, basically. I mean, it doesn't exactly line up, but it's pretty close.
That's right.
And I think that would be, honestly, if I were in your shoes, that's what I would be doing. I would do Psalms and Proverbs first. Why don't you read for us one of the Psalms that you did? You talked about Psalm 42, which is a favorite of many people, and we've even in the Christian worship tradition turned parts of that psalm into a song or two along the way. But share with us that translation for us.
I'll be
Psalm
glad
42.
to. We call the Psalms sacred songs. So this is Sacred Song 42, First Nation version, the preliminary translation. O great Spirit, like a deer panting for streams of water, my dry and thirsty soul pants for you. My whole being longs to drink deeply of you, for you are the true and living Great Spirit. When can I go to meet with you face to face? Tears are my only food as I weep day and night. My enemies never stop taunting me, saying, "Where has your Great Spirit gone?" My wounded heart is bleeding as I remember how things used to be. I was the headman dancer, leading a great crowd to Creator's sacred lodge, staying in step with the drum. The women lulu'd and the men whooped and shouted as we danced for joy and sang songs. Why do I now feel like I'm melting away? Why am I so troubled deep inside? I will put my hope in the Most Holy One. I will once again thank him for all he has done. O giver of life, my heart has fallen to the ground, so I must keep you in my thoughts. I do this from the land of river flowing down, Jordan, from the peaks of Sacred Mountain, Hermon, and Humble Hill, Mizar. I hear the echoes of your roaring waterfalls as deep calls out to deep. Your surging waves have swept over me again and again. Each day, Grandfather sends his faithful and true love my way. At night, his songs come to me as my prayer to the giver of life. O Great Spirit, my rock, I ask, why have you forgotten me? Why do I walk a path of gloom and despair, hunted down by my enemies? Their taunts are like bone-shattering blows as they echo again and again. Where has this Great Spirit of yours gone? Why do I still feel like I am melting away? Why am I so troubled deep inside? I will put my hope in the Great Spirit and once again thank him for all he has done.
Wow, that's a brilliant rendering of that psalm.
Thank you.
Wow. I don't know where to start. You know, that psalm is considered sort of technically under the lament psalms.
Yeah.
Because it begins with this downward cast. And yet there's this movement within it a couple of times where it said, yet I will hope in this one. As you read that as a native person and as other native persons read that, what does that do for your soul?
Our native people really can relate to lamenting. We have trails of tears. We have great walks where we were removed from our sacred lands, from our traditional sacred places, and we were moved to other places by the government against our will. And we were misunderstood, mistreated in so many ways. And so when we read Psalms like this, we relate it to those kinds of things. And it brings comfort to us in the same way. We can call out to the Great Spirit because he understands what we're going through. We learn through the Psalms and through the Proverbs that the Creator actually sides with the oppressed. And so we can take it that way, and we do, and that's what gives us a lot of hope.
Well, there's so many wonderful moments in the Psalms. There are things, though, in the Psalms that are hard to translate. There are words sometimes that you come to. There are the subscriptions, we call them, a sacred song of Asaph, for example. But there's this word Selah that occurs in a number of Psalms that I think is just really not understood. The Hebrew specialist can't tell us what it means exactly. Or is it a musical notation? Is it a pause? What is it exactly? So how did you guys render in this translation, the First Nations version, that wonderful word Selah?
That's really interesting because that was a topic of discussion.
I bet it was. It had to be.
Yeah. How are we going to translate? What could we relate it to in a native way other than just saying Selah? That wouldn't have a lot of meaning. So one of the things that we looked at, and one of our translation council members, who is Lumbee from North Carolina.
Oh, we did? Okay.
The Lumbee people, many of the Lumbee people are followers of Jesus in the Jesus way. And he came up with a suggestion of, well, if it's possibly a musical notation or a pause notation, at our gatherings, maybe at a powwow, the master of ceremonies might be speaking. And if he says something really good, the drummers will hit the drum just to emphasize
emphasize that moment.
Emphasize that moment.
We sometimes hit a drum as a moment of comedy,
right?
Rim tap. But in the powwow, this is the opportunity to say this is something very important.
Exactly. And so when you come to that, we put honor beat on the drum as the written form. But I'm hoping that when we actually speak this, and a lot of our Native people will, they will actually hit the drum in those places.
So the Lumbee people, they get together, they'll read the Psalms, and they'll have somebody ready on the drum. Yep. What would that be like? What would that sound like? Is there a psalm where, you could read that for us?
Well, we do have a psalm that has the honor beat on the drum, but again, I don't have the drum with me for you to hear it.
I can just hit the desk.
Yeah,
that's not going to be quite as good, right?
Right.
I won't do that.
Well, how about if I read Psalm 84 up into that point?
Okay, all right.
So, what's interesting too about this psalm is, the psalms have an introduction to them often. But we say, for the head ceremonial singer.
Okay.
Then we say on this one, we say, on a hand drum. A clan song, which is the Hebrew word maskil, of the descendants of bald-headed man, Korah.
Bald-headed man.
So I'll read this up into the point of the honor beat to give a feeling.
All right.
Grandfather, chief of spirit warriors, your sacred places are filled with much love and beauty. With my dying breath, my whole being longs to gather in the village gathering place of Grandfather. With my whole heart and body, I dance and sing for joy before the living Great Spirit. For near your sacred altars, the winged ones of the air make their home, and the swallow builds a nest for her young. For you are Grandfather, chief of spirit warriors, my honored chief and creator. Harmony and balance belong to those who make your longhouse their home. Again and again, they gave praise to you. Honor beat on the drum.
Fantastic. That's really an interesting way of thinking about that psalm. Let me just ask a few questions. I noticed that you addressed the Great Spirit. In Hebrew, that's El Elohim, and it's often translated as simply God, right? And then there were times that you talked about this the Great Chief, I think, and another time Grandfather. So these references, these addresses to God, how did you come up with those particular Great Spirit, Chief, Grandfather?
Well, it's the same as the New Testament. We didn't feel constricted that whenever the general word for deity In the Greek, it's theos. In the Hebrew, it's El or Elohim.
Right.
But we felt that when you come to that word, that's a kind of a general word that's used for other deities also sometimes. We felt like it would be good to take different tribes of our native people, refer to the Great Spirit, to God. So we use Great Spirit, we use Creator, Elohim. And when you come to Adonai, which is for Lord in the English translations, that's where we come into our honored chief.
Honored chief. So Adonai becomes honored chief.
Becomes honored chief.
Okay.
So we tried to capture as close to the Hebrew as we could. You know, when we come to the sacred Hebrew name for the Creator, YHWH.
Yeah.
Some scholars say it could be pronounced Yahweh. We did something the Jewish people do. They don't say that name.
Right.
Traditionally.
Right. And in English translations, usually it's Lord in all capital letters, right, to designate it from Adonai.
Yeah,
So-
and Lord is a title of honor, respect, and dignity. Okay.
But it's not used by native.
But native people don't.
Don't use the word Lord.
Right, and the reason they don't is because the way the gospel came and the settlers came from Europe and the lordships and the way Lord and kings were used there became something for us that was a takeover.
An oppression.
We were oppressed under lords. And so that's why in this translation we stayed away from the title Lord. But we looked for this unique name. We wanted people to know this is very unique. We wanted to use something in the Old Testament for that name to replace it like the Hebrew people do. But with something that would relate to our native people, a title that carries honor, respect, dignity, and intimacy. Many of our tribes used, my own tribe, grandfather. In my language, it's Mishomis, grandfather. And many times when we'd pray, before we'd say our prayers, we would welcome grandfather from all the directions, Mishomis. And that's honoring that he's everywhere. You know, so we chose grandfather. We had a lot of discussion about this, but we finally settled on it for the term Yahweh or YHWH, called
the divine name.
Divine name.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right.
So grandfather, it just represents that to you. And it's a term that you were already familiar with.
Yes.
Everything. A Catholic priest friend of mine says a word like God is a box that people put things into. A Muslim can refer to God, and a Christian and a Jew, and they all mean something a little different by that very word. But what I hear you doing in this translation doing is taking the categories of honor and dignity and, in a sense, intimacy, and making that relationally with one who is close.
Yeah.
Close to you. That's a really interesting choice.
Yeah,
there.
Black Elk actually, he's a Lakota man, holy man, and who became a follower of Jesus in his later years. He actually said that grandfather was an intimate way to refer to the Creator, to the Supreme Being.
In the New Testament, Jesus talks, and he references, and Paul does as well, Abba, Father, which carries a sense of intimacy. Some have said, well, it's like daddy, one who's close. Not dad, father, but daddy kind of closeness. I think that's probably going a little too far, but I do think that there's a sense of intimacy to that. Fascinating translation. Want people to know about it, and it's doing very well. There's a lot of interest in it, both among Native people and non-Native people, as churches and academicians as well. When do you think this translation might be out?
Well, we finished the work on the translation and turned it over to InterVarsity Press, our publisher, and they are in the process of it that they go through to get it published, which means they're going to have it read over and over again. They're going to ask us more questions, and finally, they're anticipating perhaps summer of 2025.
Summer of 2025. Well, that'll be great. I am so happy to meet you and Darlene face to face. Now, you guys are also musicians. Darlene plays the native flute, and you play guitar, and you guys are on Bandcamp, and you guys have got CDs. And they look on Bandcamp for Rain Song RAINSONG.
That's
Rain
correct.
Song. That's the name of your group? Is that the...
Yeah, that's Darlene and I are a musical duo called Rain Song. And you can find it on rainsongmusic.com on our website. You can go there and you can find all of our music there that'll point you to Bandcamp.
What is that website if people want to go and see it?
Go to rainsongmusic,
Okay.
all one word, .com.
Okay.
Or you can go to firstnationsversion.com, same website.
Same website, but it has two different
But you'll have to
approaches.
click on where it says music
Okay.
to get to the Rain Song part.
Okay, great. But it's a delight to meet you. Thanks for being here and being a part of our conversation today about the upcoming Psalms and Proverbs translation from the First Nation version. Terry Wildman, thanks so much.
Miigwech, Bizendawayeg. Thank you for listening.
You know, it's always fun to talk to Terry Wildman. I love to hear him read Scripture in the First Nations version. There's just something wonderful, beautiful about it. Thanks to Kathy Capes, Jessica Mauser, Phil Keggy, and Jana Firestone for helping us produce the Stone Chapel podcast. Until next time, I'm David Capes. Thanks for listening.
You know, if you listen to the podcast, you know that I love research. I used to lead a research company. So I love when research helps to illustrate a question we have. And one of the questions a lot of people are having is, how do we look to the decline of the family, maybe the relationship around fatherhood and issues of faith and church? Well, again, the Communio nationwide study on faith and relationships actually points to the collapse of marriage, where resident fatherhood fits into that, and how they all point ultimately to a relationship to Christianity and decline in the church. So visit communio.org/study to download Communio's nationwide study on faith and relationships.